out there. This is File 741. I'm Beckah.
And I'm Leigh.
And we have a very special episode planned for you today. We are joined by our friend Ivy, who is going to talk with us today. It is February, which means love. Gross. So we are going to be talking about our favorite comic book ships today. Hope you are excited. We have some really fun things to talk about.
Hello, my name is Ivy. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to talk about comic book ships.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have you.
Okay, great. So I think I would like to start with a comic called Space Battle Lunchtime. It's only got 2 volumes, so I liked that so that it was a limited series. And the ships that I enjoyed from that are the lead character, Peony and Neptunia. Basically, Space Battle Lunchtime is an intergalactic cooking competition show. Each contestant has to cook dishes using a wide variety of space ingredients, which they aren't usually familiar with. Peony is the only human contestant from Earth, and her speciality is baking. She's sweet and kind, but she's also quite brave and clever. She doesn't give up. Neptunia is mysterious and seemingly cold.
Is she from Neptune?
You would think that she would be from Neptune, but apparently her background, they don't really know where she's from, but she was suspected to be a mercenary from Pluto. So
awesome.
I thought that was interesting. So anyway, she's very tough and she doesn't show her emotions very well. And so she doesn't trust anybody, especially Peony at the beginning of the competition, because she's seen through the sweetness as being, just a cover to try and win everybody over. But what ends up happening is she knocks into her during a competition, and Neptunia's dish falls, and Peony saves it for her, and she didn't have to do that. So then she's like, okay, well, maybe she's okay. And they end up kind of starting off as friends, and then as the competition gets more heated, so does their romance. And eventually Peony gets kidnapped by one of the other contestants so that she can lose the competition, and sent to another planet for a pretty terrible competition show that's death by cooking in some ways.
Oh, no.
And so Neptunia figures out the plot of that and ends up going to rescue her, and they end up living happily ever after. So I like that.
Nice. Yeah, I guess it goes without saying that all of these ships that we're talking about are queer ships. Whoop. Yeah, because that's what we talk about a lot on this podcast. So one of my favorite ships is from the comic called Bingo Love, which as far as I know at the moment only has 1 volume, but there is an edition called the Jackpot edition, which has some extra small stories at the end of the main story, and that is really fun. They're written by a lot of different people, including T. Franklin, Sean Pryor, Margaret Bennett, Allison Cole, Amanda Debert, and Gail Simone. And there are so many amazing artists because there's a lot of different stories, but the first volume is illustrated by Jen St. Ong, maybe, and colors by Joy San. So in this story, there's a young woman named Hazel. She's in middle school, and she is at a bingo hall with her grandmother, and she sees this other young woman who is also there with her family, Mari, and for Hazel, when she sees Mari, it's love at first sight. And it turns out they are going to the same school. Mari just moved there, and so they start spending time together and very soon become best friends. As they grow older, they Hazel realizes that her feelings for Mari are romantic, and she imagines them getting married and having this life together. And when they're in high school, Mari has a bad experience, and Hazel is comforting her, and Mari kisses her, and so realizes that their feelings are reciprocated. But this story takes place initially in the 60s, and so their love is not accepted or understood, and their families decide that they can't be together. So then almost 50 years later, they've both been married, they've had families, they have grandchildren. They happen to run into each other again at a bingo hall, same bingo hall, and all of a sudden, all of these feelings that they both had been suppressing come out again, and so they find each other and kind of embark on this fraught journey of finding a way to be together. The comic is great. The colors are so vibrant and lovely. The characters are really well developed and unique. Part of what I love about this comic is it's a story about two older women and women of color. Race is a really important part of who they are. It's not just diversity for diversity's sake. Mari is tall and confident. Hazel is curvy. She has very dark skin too, which a lot of media love interests for Black women tend to be lighter skinned, so I really liked that as well. They're both really comfortable in their sexuality, in their bodies, and they're both really beautiful. There's like I said, they're both older women, and a lot of media also doesn't focus on older women and see them as sexual people or sexual humans, and so that's really cool as well. I also appreciate that this story deals honestly with how that changes the entire family relationship. It's really difficult to process for both families, this kind of new thing that these women are experiencing. When I was a kid, my parents got divorced when I was very, very young, and so I grew up with my mom, and she remarried when I was about 13, and it was really weird and difficult. And it wasn't that I didn't like my stepdad. Right now we have a really good relationship, but when you're that young and you kind of experience that big of a change in your family, that can be really hard to process, even if it's a good thing. And so I think it's really interesting to see how the family reacts and how they decide to accept these two women. I also really, really appreciate that this comic also deals with aging and what it's like, and the love and heartache that goes into caring for an ailing partner. So there's just a lot of really great things about this comic. It's a really sweet and romantic story. It's so gross. So Ivy, why don't you tell us about the ship that you brought?
All right, so I'm here to talk about Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy from the DC universe.
Woohoo!
Yeah. So the comics that where they're a canonized couple are DC Bombshells, which is the alternate universe World War II timeline that really focuses on all of the female superheroes and anti-heroes from the DC universe. And then the Harley Quinn series, so that's the New 52 Harley Quinn and the Rebirth Harley Quinn. It's the same story. They just rebranded it because they're DC and that's how they roll. So there's a few reasons that I am super into them as a couple, and it largely has to do with how much they both bloom, but particularly how much Harley Quinn grows as a character as she begins her relationship with Poison Ivy and ends her relationship with the Joker. So the first reason is that they are canon. In Batman the Animated Series, the characters first met, so that series was where Harley Quinn first became a character. There is an episode focused on Harley and Ivy. Harley Quinn gets temporarily separated from the Joker because she's being silly, and she ruins one of the Joker's many attempts to foil Batman, and so she teams up with Poison Ivy, and there's a lot of queer undertones to that episode. It's implied that they're living together in a one-bedroom apartment. They get up to all sorts of shenanigans the entire episode, but at the end of the episode, Harley is talking about wanting to go back with the Joker. Ivy is very annoyed by that, and it's the last time that they appear together in the entire series. Fast forward a number of years, and we have them actually canonized as a couple in multiple comics. So the next topic I'd like to talk about with this ship is that their relationship is generally healthy. This is a great contrast to the mad love Harley Quinn and Joker story, which was obsessive on Harley's part and physically and mentally abusive on the Joker's part. And that's a huge contrast with the Harley and Ivy relationship. In the bombshell story Uprising, shortly before the first kiss between the couple, which I believe is their first kiss in any canon, Ivy makes a comment that she has no intention of ever breaking Harley Quinn's heart, which is very important to someone like Harley, who is love obsessed. In the Harley Quinn New 52 and Rebirth, the extent of Poison Ivy telling Harley Quinn what she should do with her life is suggesting that she takes some things off her plate. She is doing all kinds of things in those stories, and it leads to a lot of mental health issues for her. So she will make recommendations, but she never tells Harley what to do, and she always comes to pick up the pieces when everything falls apart because Harley does not listen. And the final reason that I love them so much is that they really do make one another better. Poison Ivy is fiercely independent. She's as committed to her environmental causes as she is to her relationships. In the Harley Quinn series, this forces Harley to spend time on her other pursuits and her other relationships and not rely solely on her primary romantic partner. And then conversely, Poison Ivy forms closer connections with other people because she is in a relationship with a social butterfly. It's similar in Bombshells when Harley Quinn literally crash lands on a rocket in Poison Ivy's garden. She convinces her to come join the Bombshells and stop working solo against the Nazis. And then in the story Joker Loves Harley from the Rebirth series, there's a moment that I think is really emblematic of how much Harley has changed. We see a dream sequence that follows Harley Quinn and the Joker getting married, having a home, having kids, watching them grow up, which is a really classic Harley Quinn sequence. I think there was something similar in the Suicide Squad movie, but then we realize that the dream is coming from a Joker copycat. And when he wakes up, Harley Quinn, who believes he is the real Joker at this point, has captured him and has promised him that she will bring harm to him because when she met with the real Joker in prison, she said that if he ever came near her again, that's what she would do. So not to suggest that bringing harm to people is a sign of a healthy relationship, but she is no longer obsessed with that person. She has a lot of healthy relationships in that series, and a lot of that is because her romantic relationship is so healthy.
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
really cool, too, to see in a really big series like, or a really big company like DC, or Marvel, those sort of queer relationships.
Yeah.
We definitely have a ways to go. You know, X-Men, of course, has a little bit of that, some Marvel stories, but we haven't seen it on screen yet. And so we're really hoping that in the future we'll be able to see some of that. But it's nice that that's an avenue that's a little more mainstream.
Yeah.
You know, Leigh and I talk a lot about indie comics and smaller works, but it's really great to see that kind of representation in the mainstream.
Yeah, absolutely.
Leigh, do you have a couple more you want to share with us?
Yeah, but first I wanted to thank Ivy for coming and sharing this. One of the reasons is that I thought about her for this podcast too was because for a while I've disliked the character of Harley Quinn, and I finally had asked Ivy because she was always posting things online. I was like, why do you like this character so much? And then she gave me all these things to read and everything, and I've since changed my opinion. So
That's what
yes,
I'm here for.
Yes, I very much appreciate being enlightened. So thank you for sharing this information.
It is absolutely my pleasure.
Okay, I think I will move on to Moonstruck, which is also a continuing series. It's an indie comic and it's new. It's basically within our world is a hidden world of magic, and it's kind of living in plain sight. And so it's a world full of magical creatures, a lot of them mythological creatures as well. And they're living ordinary lives just like you and I. And there's a character of Julie who works at a local coffee shop, and she has a best friend, Chet, who is a non-binary queer centaur. He's probably the best part of the comic, I would say.
I was about to say, he's all of those words strung
he's
together.
Really, he's a ton of fun. Or they are a ton of fun, sorry. They are very loud and proud and really enjoy being a magical creature. Julie, on the other hand, is not. She's the complete opposite. She is a werewolf and embarrassed of it. All she wants in life is to be normal like everybody else. She starts dating Selena, which is another werewolf, a werewolf of color as well. They're very compatible, but their views on being a werewolf are very different because Selena is very comfortable and accepting of who she is. And so when Julie's best friend Chet gets their magic stolen from a magic thief, so to speak, and they get turned into a human, they become very depressed. And so Julie and Selena decide that they are going to help Chet find their magic again and become a centaur again. In the process of doing that and hunting down the magic thief, Julie and Selena end up having to use their werewolf powers in order to overcome the thief. And Selena initiates that, and so Julie gets very upset by that. It's very traumatic for her because she doesn't like having to turn into a werewolf. It's very shameful for her. So it becomes kind of a fight afterwards between them, and Selena has to, tell her that, this is who we are. I mean, we shouldn't be ashamed of who we are. So Julie kind of goes through this process of coming around and realizing that what she has is a gift, especially seeing how Chet losing his centaur ability, how much that affected him, and how, it makes their magical sides make them more special. So through that process of her kind of coming around about herself and who she is, her and Selena become closer, and they end up, it ends up becoming something that solidifies their relationship instead of wedges between them. What I liked about it is that it's an unapologetically queer comic. Nobody in the comic really questions whether the characters are gay or straight or anything like that. They're just attracted to who they're attracted to. And it's kind of like a subtext for, people who are afraid to come out in some ways. And, you're dating, but you don't want the world to know type thing. And you don't want it to leave your small little world so that everybody would know. And so it was just kind of a great, nice way of bringing that in. And I also think that it was maybe geared towards middle school and high school students as well, and so I think that was the perfect way of doing that by creating this magical world and sending the same message. So
yeah, I think it's really interesting to think about. Sometimes, like the X-Men, there's the queer stuff is coded, and so the people who can see that kind of queer subtext know it's there, but for some reason or other people think they can't be overt about it. But it's fun to have a story that like with Lupin in Harry Potter, that was kind of like a queer coded character, but it is very much not, which annoys me, but you can still have a story that's about magic that could be coded queer, but is then openly queer.
Yes.
So that's really nice too, to kind of have both sides, have that kind of magical element as well as the openly queer characters and relationships. So that's really fun. Thank you for sharing.
Of course.
Kind of on the same sort of magical note, the other comic I wanted to talk about is called The Backstagers. And that was written by James Tyson IV, I believe, illustrated by Ryan Singh, and colors by Walter Baiamonte. I'm just going to apologize to any of these people if they ever listen to this podcast. I apologize for I'm sure not pronouncing your names correctly. So this story follows a character named Jory. He's starting a new high school. It's an all-boys school. And because his mom works late, he has to find an after-school activity. So he's wandering around campus. He sees a sign for the drama club, decides to check it out. And the leaders of the drama club are two actors and twins named Kevin and Blake McQuinn. And they are just so over the top and wonderful, but they ask Jory to do them a favor and grab something from backstage. So Jory wanders into the backstage and meets the Backstagers, Sasha, Aziz, Beckett, and Hunter. The story's really fun. It's full of all sorts of supernatural adventure and a little bit of romance for a lot of the characters. But Jory and Hunter are one of my favorite comic couples for a few reasons, one of which is that it's one element of the story that really grounds the adventure. With all the paranormal activity going on, it's nice to have something else for the characters to experience in addition to all this peril and excitement. I would say that this is another kind of atypical romance featuring characters that we don't usually romanticize. Jory is short, he's somewhat timid, he's a young black man who is neither a total nerd nor a star athlete, so he's just an ordinary person. And then Hunter, the love interest, is a tall blonde hunk, but although he's a stagehand and builds a lot of sets and works with tools a lot, he's not in any way quote-unquote macho. And he's got kind of a gut, so he's a little bigger, and he's just very kind and sensitive, and they work really well together. When they meet, they just have an immediate connection, and they have a really great chemistry, and Jory then really knows that this is where he belongs. Their first adventure together leads them to grow closer, and what I like is that although they're high school students, they articulate their feelings very well. They're very supportive of one another and express their gratitude for one another and the things that they share together. There are other plots in the main story in the volume, so sometimes Jory and Hunter's relationship becomes a backstage plot. And so it develops slowly, but that's kind of what makes it fun. It feels very realistic. It feels very honest, and the foundations are laid in the first volume for their relationship, and it's just a really sweet romance and story. And then I like all the paranormal stuff. It's very much like Lumberjanes in that way. So it's got kind of this paranormal supernatural adventure going on, but then these very real relationships are forming, friendships and romantic relationships that really give it heart and ground it in reality.
Awesome.
It's really nice.
The last one I chose was Princess Ever After, which I don't believe is also a continuing series. I think it was just a one volume. And the two main characters are Sadie and Amira. They are both princesses, but they are not ordinary princesses. Sadie is in line with her sister to be the next queen of their kingdom, and after their father dies, her older sister would be the next queen, but she feels jealous that Sadie is in line at all, basically, and she's constantly putting her down and calling her stupid and fat and ugly and things like that. So to make sure that she gets to be queen and her younger sister does not, and that's never going to be an issue, she locks her away in a tower, which is very fairy tale. And so during that time, many princes come to try and rescue her, but they all fail. And it doesn't really seem like she's super into them anyway. And then Princess Amira comes, but Princess Amira is definitely not like a usual princess. She comes to rescue her, but she asks for consent first, which I also appreciate. So Amira dresses in men's clothing, does not wear a dress like a typical princess. Her background was that she didn't want to get married when she was a princess, so she left her kingdom to just kind of ride on and have adventures. And so that's when she comes upon the tower where Sadie is locked away. So she is able to break her out. They kind of go on their own adventure for a little bit away from the kingdom. And because they both break traditions in the fairy tale, in doing so, their adventure is very unique from the fairy tale. They also run into a regular prince who is trying to rescue princesses and do the typical thing, and they kind of show him that that's kind of toxic masculinity. Maybe you should not do that, and maybe you should be more respectful, and maybe not kill this ogre that we run into. Maybe find out why he's mad, and it ends up because he doesn't have enough room to dance. So he's stomping all over the village because he didn't have enough room to dance. So they showed him how to dance a little bit in close quarters. It's just fun. I really enjoy it. So anyway, what ends up happening is they end up getting back to the kingdom, and they end up overpowering the queen because the followers of the kingdom or the villagers do not like her at all. And so what I really liked about it, though, is that instead of it being immediately a happy ever after, Amira decides that she wants to have more adventures in life and grow up a little bit before she makes any decisions about what she wants for her future. And so does Sadie. So Sadie stays the queen. They grow up for a while apart, and Amira becomes a captain in the army. And then when she returns to the kingdom when they're much older, they find out that they're still in love, and then they end up deciding to live happily ever after that. So it's kind of nice. I enjoyed the way that they did the story and trying to show the traditional issues that are problematic in fairy tales, and then showing a way for girls to see that that's not the way it needs to be.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that one. Ivy, you might be able to talk to this a little bit as well, since you also work at a library.
Yes.
But Princess Ever After is shelved in the children's room.
Oh, nice.
With Legend of Korra is there as well. Backstagers, Lumberjanes, Nimona, Space Lunch Battle Time. What is it called?
Space Battle Lunchtime.
Thank
Close.
you. I had all the words right, just not in the right order. Would probably be shelved in in the teen section, and I know Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy are in the adult section. So it's kind of interesting to see where these things usually end up, but it's also really refreshing to be able to tell like younger kids, like, here are things for you where you might see yourself reflected, and kind of have that throughout the library instead of just in one place, like adult, quote unquote, because people think queer things are adult. But yeah,
even for that matter.
Or what?
Comics, even for that
Yeah.
matter. They're too violent, or they're too this and that.
Yeah, so do you have that kind of experience when you're like finding things for people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's awesome that comics are all over the library. I think it's awesome that queer stories are all over the library, and that there are innocent queer stories particularly happening in comics. When I was growing up, I did not experience queer stories. They were definitely considered taboo and mature regardless of what was happening in the story. So it's a delight to be able to show young people a range of things that they can see and stories they can experience, whether they are or end up being queer people or not. It's nice to have a range of characters to reflect upon.
Absolutely, and I will say too that a lot of these comics can be found in print at your local library, but a lot of the libraries also have them in digital content. That's how I read most of my comics, is through Hoopla. But yeah, there's a lot of different avenues, and I think there's a lot of different ways to consume this content, which is great. So thank you so much for joining us. We want to do a few more shout outs because there are so many great comics out there with awesome queer stories. I love Fence, which is a really fun kind of story about fencing at an all-boys school. There's a new YA graphic novel called Bloom, which I haven't read, but one of my favorite illustrators that I follow online did a little illustration of it, so I'm really excited to see that. It's another kind of young man's queer romance, also related to baking. So
nice.
There's a lot of baking, apparently. And Leigh, what did you say there was another one?
Check Please also had baking as a thing. It's very
really
interesting. Yeah, so seems to go hand in hand.
Fun.
Yeah, that one is also a queer romantic comic, but it also focuses on hockey and baking.
Hey,
so.
I guess interesting. I like baking, so
I do
maybe
too. It's kind of fun though how it mixes with different things. Like that one's hockey and baking. This one, Space Battle Lunchtime, is baking and sci-fi. So it's never just baking by itself, it seems. Or then Moonstruck is more baking and coffee and magic. So it's just interesting how that seems to make its way in there.
Yeah, very
Apparently
interesting.
we need to be baking more.
We also wanted to do another shout out to Steven Universe, which is like one of the greatest things ever created, but they do have some graphic novels available. And
Xena, I'm very happy that now that Xena has been redone into comics, it is now openly queer. There's no more subtext.
Finally!
Yay!
Yeah. And then we said it before, Legend of Korra in the comics does solidify the canon of Korrasami, and they do kiss. And that's also in the kids section at the library. I think I mentioned that before.
I didn't know that they had comics in separate areas. I thought they were all in one general area. So
no, it's all separated by age range.
Huh. Wow.
Yeah.
That's
Especially
good to
if
know.
the like collection person knows comics. There's a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah.
I will swing by the kids section more often.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Ivy. We really appreciated your input, and it was really fun to chat with you.
Thanks for inviting me. It was awesome.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, this has been another exciting File 741. I'm Leigh.
And I'm Beckah.
I'm Ivy.
Thank you for listening, and please like us on Facebook or follow us on Instagram and Twitter. You can tune in to all of our podcasts on iTunes, Podbean, YouTube, or at thefeminerdfiles.net.
YouTube.
Oh my God.